I guess my question that inspired this little video is, are you bringing more functional based movements into your yoga practice, or are you routinely practicing them? And I guess I wanted to give you guys like a little bit of a background on my journey up till now, and then also give you what I feel are it was a hard list to create, but the 5 most important functional movements that everyone who's practicing yoga, or just everybody really, for health and longevity, I feel like they should be practicing these at least semi-regularly. So I started doing like modern postural yoga in 1992. Prior to that, I'd been introduced to more of the meditative aspects of yoga when I was a little kid by my parents, and we used to meditate together with a Japanese teacher. And in 1992, I got a copy of the Illustrated Guide to Yoga by Swami Vishnu Devananda, and mostly self-guided. Went through and tried out a lot of the postures and the movements and the kriyas and the different exercises in the book. Got really interested in it, and in 1994 went to India and studied yoga more intensively. I was there for 6 months, and then from 95 until I would say 2010, so for like a period of about 15 years, I practiced pretty heavily vinyasa style of yoga, Ashtanga yoga. And I was probably at around the 10 to 15 year mark that I started noticing, of course I had a lot of great benefits from that practice, but I started noticing it might have been a function of my age, or just in general, the way that the postures were affecting me, and always going to kind of end range positions, that I started getting really unstable in my joints. So in particular, I dislocated my shoulder, became very unstable. I dislocated my shoulder 4 times. My knees would go out frequently, my lower back went out frequently. And when I asked my colleagues and my teachers about it, they were kind of, I guess, I was quite disappointed with the reports, because a lot of these instabilities were showing up less in my yoga practice, in my postural practice, and more in just sort of day-to-day life. Okay, so if I went skiing, or if I was playing soccer with my kids, or lifting things, I found that things would go out really easily. My joints in general, shoulders, lower back, knees, were quite unstable. And when I asked my colleagues and my teachers about it at the time, they just basically, the consensus was they don't really do much outside of a yoga practice. And that was kind of eye-opening for me, because I realized one of the values that I had, and one of the broader reasons why I was practicing yoga, was for health reasons. And so I started asking myself, at the time I was in my 30s, and I started asking myself, is this the trajectory that I want to go on? Do I want to keep getting more and more unstable? When I first started the postural yoga in 1992, I was quite stiff. I'd been lifting weights as a teenager, and I was really stiff. Like I couldn't reach past my knees in a forward bend, and I was quite tight in my muscles. So I think that 15 plus year period of real intense focus on the postural elements of the asanas, I got quite flexible, and was able to achieve a lot of the advanced positions. So I think that was a sort of a turning point for me, when I realized, okay, what are our bodies designed for, And can I continue to get the benefits from my yoga practice, all of the great benefits, both mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and in terms of the as a connection practice, but can I do it in a way that is not, sacrificing the health and well-being of my physical body? I think there was some magical thinking that I had initially in the early days, where I just thought, if I do this combination of movements and postures, I'm gonna have superhuman strength and abilities. And I think that moment, that turning point when I realized I'd become quite unstable in my joints, was a kind of a critical moment for me. So I don't know, maybe you're experiencing something similar, or maybe you're not there yet, but you're considering, how other movements factor into kind of a typical yoga type of practice, a postural yoga practice. And what, in my experience these days, I'm seeing organically a lot of functional movements just woven in to yoga classes. So I don't know, I'm wondering if you guys are seeing that too. If you're a teacher, are you bringing those kind of movements into your classes, into your practice? So, so all that to say, I highly recommend it from a health point of view, that you consider yoga as one, or traditional postural yoga as one of the things that you practice, and keep thinking and testing your movements and your physicality and the resilience of your tissue against different functional movements, whether you're just including some functional movements in your yoga practice, or you have other things that you do, like a climbing practice or a strength practice of some kind, where maybe you lift external loads in the gym, or that there's other things that you do. What are, in my opinion, the most important things if you are going to start incorporating functional movements into your routines, into your daily routines? And these can be short, little, nutritious movement snacks that you do. They don't have to be done all together, but I just want to give you kind of an overview of the things that I recommend that you include in a well-rounded movement practice that includes some functionality. Okay, so the first thing that I think is really useful to incorporate into your movement practice is some sort of grip strength. Okay, so grip strength, what makes grip strength so important is they've shown a correlation between lower hospital recovery times and stronger grip strength. So it's a really interesting idea. It's like essentially our ability to recover is faster depending on how strong our grip strength is. So there's many ways, obviously, that you can build up your grip strength. You can just regularly squeeze things. I'm going to show you a movement in a moment that's a great way to stack a couple of different functional movements, including grip strength. But gripping different surfaces, different textures, tree branches, smooth surfaces like walls or bars, dowels, rubbing dowels, whether it's a broomstick like this one, and just this kind of movement where you're improving your grip strength. When we think about the kind of movements that we're doing in postural yoga practices, mostly our hands are spread. We don't do a lot of gripping or pulling. So adding that in is a great complement, of course, to the expansion that we often see in our hands in weight-bearing postures or in different asanas. Okay, so the second movement is you can stack this one, the first one, the grip strength, with this one. Now, I mentioned that one of the things that I struggled a lot with was instability in my shoulder joints. Okay, and I believe that that was a direct result of always pushing to the end range positions in my yoga practice. I developed a lot of instability in my shoulder joints. one of the things that's fixed that for me is a regular hanging practice. Okay, so I have these rings that I have installed in my yoga space, and there's many different things that you can hang on. You know, you can hang on tree branches, on monkey bars, pull-up bars. Why I like the rings is they're pretty adaptable. If you do any kind of pull strength stuff like TRX, or you want to develop, that's another thing that many yogis are missing in their practice, is we don't do a lot of pulling in yoga. It's mostly pushing, right? You think upward dog, downward dog, planks, different pushing movements. We barely do any pulling. So that creates some postural imbalances and some muscular imbalances. So hanging is one of those, I think, one of the most nutritious movements. And the cool thing is it combines grip strength with pull strength. Okay, so why I like the rings is that you can adjust the height, you know, and you can use them for different rowing movements, and they can pretty much hang. I have them attached to two hooks in the studs in the ceiling. But you can attach them to beams or tree branches, or so they're really easy to use and they're portable. Okay. The other option is to have a chin-up bar that you put in a place that you walk, you know, in a doorway that you walk several times a day, and you just, every time that you walk through that, which is easy during these pandemic times. You know, a lot of people are at home a lot, so just hang something up that you can easily hang on. Okay, so I like to start overhead hanging with my feet on the floor. Okay, so we can progress the load over time. So it can just start by being here, like I'm doing here, with my feet on the floor, my knees are bent, and I can work different, like one-handed hang. I can work with different grips, one hand in, one hand out, turning the hands in, turning the hands out. I can play with passive hangs, like taking my shoulders up towards my ears, and active hangs where I draw my shoulders away from the ears. Both are nutritious and beneficial. Maybe you're alternating between those different hanging movements. Okay, you can also vary the angle of the hang. So it could be not necessarily directly overhead. You could hang onto a banister that's more horizontal with your shoulders. So incorporating some hanging movements. Okay, for me that fixed my shoulder. Okay, so my shoulder was so unstable that the orthopedic surgeon wanted to operate on especially this right shoulder. And at that point was when I discovered hanging and the benefits of hanging to correct the overstretching of the reflex tendons. See, I pulled my end ranges of motion so far that I lost that resilience in the tissue. So hanging is one of those amazing things. We're actually regaining the elasticity of a healthy shoulder. Okay, so for me, just anecdotally, I was able to avoid the surgery, and I haven't had any problems since I incorporated hanging about, I would say, 7 years ago, and it's still feeling really good. There's other benefits, obviously, for hanging. It's the beginning of developing pull strength. So, you know, a lot of people, different levels of strength in terms of pulling and chin-ups, but a lot of times people don't emphasize the end range of a pulling motion where you can really get that full range of motion in your shoulder blades and your shoulders before getting that motion to pull. Okay, so pulling strength is super key, but it all starts with good hanging mobility, shoulder mobility, and that reflex ability in your shoulders. Okay. The third movement that I think is that everyone needs to know and needs to be practicing is an overhead squat. Okay, so I have a broomstick here that I like to use when I'm doing the overhead squat, but you can use weight, but I suggest first using the broomstick just so you get the mobility aspect. Okay, so the overhead squat is kind of a compound movement that includes shoulder, thoracic mobility, okay, so overhead motion with your arms, but also hip mobility, ankles, knees, and feet. It's such a useful movement to do, and it's something we should be practicing regularly. It's basically a squat, so I'm going to be squatting down, but the difference is if I just go into, say, a yoga-based squat that we see here, like I'm doing malasana posture, right? There's different variations. You can have feet together, fold forward, reach around, grab your heels. So there's lots of different variations, but the difference with the overhead squat is that if I turn to the side, you'll see here that my spine is rounded. So in malasana, in the yoga pose malasana, my back is in a rounded position. In the overhead squat, okay, so I start with my arms up overhead, and my arms are in a kind of Y shape, okay? I'm not letting my back round. I'm gonna keep my arms back. And by the way, if you don't have this full range of motion in your shoulders, just go to where you can go, okay? And that goes for the overhead hang as well, the hanging position. But the hanging will increase proper range of motion while still keeping the resilience in your tissues. So I have my arms up overhead, level with my ears. I'm gonna turn my toes out a little bit, okay? So I don't wanna have my feet too parallel. Some of you might have the mobility to do that, but just to start with, let your feet, if you walk in place and just let your feet naturally turn out, everybody's squat is gonna look a little bit different, okay? Some people have more of a turnout, some people can do it straight on, but what we don't wanna have happen is as we bend that the knees knock in. So as I go, so I'm gonna take a few steps so I just find my natural turnout in my hip joints. I'm gonna bend my knees over the middle of my foot. I'm gonna keep my arms back and I go as low as I can go with my arms back, okay? So what that does, if you see it from the side, is as I go down, I'm maintaining thoracic extension, okay? So I have this kind of, instead of rounding in malasana and borrowing from my spine to open the hips, that's what makes it such a useful movement, that I'm using thoracic extension, so I'm arching my back, I'm keeping my shoulders open, while at the same time kind of doing this complementary movement with my hips, ankles, knees, and feet, okay? So when you're doing overhead squat, if you can do it with a mirror or just have someone watch you, the ideal position would be to maintain the parallel line between your forearms and your shins. Okay, so what that means is right here, those two lines are parallel. When I go low down here, see my arms have to shift forward a little bit, but see how my shins and my arms are parallel, okay? So I'm not over here, okay? And at first, if I can't quite get that, I might lift my heels up, right? To get those more or less on the same parallel line. Okay, so forearms and shins are parallel. And then when we look at it from the front, my elbows stay straight, so I don't want to bend my elbows as I go down. And my knees stay over my toes. Okay, so those are the things to look for when you're doing this. It can feel quite awkward because you're going to really be challenging your thoracic mobility, okay, the mobility of your thoracic spine, which tends to get quite tight and hunched over for a lot of us, especially with lots of phone use and computer use. So it's a great way to open up your T-spine and your shoulders, but also improve the mobility in your knees, your ankles, and your feet. The other thing about it is rather than hanging out at the end range at the bottom, that you're with the overhead squat, especially if you add some weight, like a little bit of weight, you'll have to modulate how low you go because you want to be able to get back up. So if I just show you what I mean by that, instead of going just all the way down, just hanging out in kind of a resting position, I'm going to stay kind of with a bit of tension. Okay, so instead of being all the way down here, kind of slack, I'm in a bit of tension, and that's going to ensure that my tissues have the resilience to come back to their resting position or resting length. Okay, which is one of the things I think with yoga over time that you want to be testing whether you have the control in your range. So rather than just hanging out in the end range of the asana and breathing, which has some value, okay, really testing, like, if I have to add a bit of load or the load of my body weight, can I get down and up fairly easily and gracefully? Okay, so that's the third movement. The fourth movement is balancing. Okay, so balancing is something that as we age definitely goes on the decline. It's really an important thing for your brain and for the complexity of your spatial awareness. Okay, and balancing, of course, you might be doing yoga postures, but there's a few things that I want to mention about balancing that you might not be doing that could be really helpful to just kind of up level your balance practice. Okay, so a lot of times, so I'll just come to standing here so I can show you. A lot of times yogis in, say, balance poses, say tree pose or different balance postures, whether it's, on your hands, like handstand, or on your feet, okay? A lot of times we rely quite a bit on our visual stimulation, okay? So I think that there's three ways that we can work with balance, three main ways, okay? The first is to our visual cues. So in yoga we call it the drishti. We use a fixed point, and that helps us to have that greater spatial awareness. It helps with balance. The second way is with our vestibular balance, our inner ear balance, okay? So by keeping your head on the same level, you'll be kind of leveling that lying level, so to speak, that helps you balance your vestibular, your inner ear balance. And the third way is getting information from your feet, okay? So what I suggest is that you a lot of times in yoga postures, we become overly reliant on our visual system and our vestibular system. So I think it's useful sometimes, the idea, like, if you take away one of your senses, the other ones get stronger, okay? So if you were to close your eyes, you would get stronger in hearing, you would get stronger in your tactile senses, because those just kind of fill in the space that's missing from the visual sense, okay? So what I suggest with balance, so just something simple, doesn't have to be a yoga pose just yet, is come off of one foot, okay, just so you're balancing on one foot. Okay, easy starting position, we use all three. The feedback from the foot, the visual cue, you find a fixed point in front of you, and then your head is straight on. We can take out the vestibular system by turning the head from side to side. Now you'll start to notice, not only is the visual also a little bit tricky, okay, so you could turn just one and hold, find a fixed point over here, turn and one, hold, find a fixed point over here. If you add a kind of rapid turn in your head, then it becomes very much about just the feedback you're getting from your feet, because you're disturbing your visual system, you're disturbing your vestibular system, okay? So the second thing to do to make it a little more challenging, other than moving your head and making your vestibular system work harder, is to close your eyes. Okay, so this could be done in a yoga pose, okay, like a tree pose, or just having your foot off the ground. Close your eyes and just feel how, use your arms to help you make micro counterbalances, okay? And just feel how you have to really use all those, right now my ankles are shaking a little bit because I have to use all those micro adjustments in my ankles, whereas when I open my eyes, there's not much of that happening, okay? So I find like it's a way that you can up level your balance practice. The other way is to take something soft, say like a cushion. This is the third way. This could be that you stand on, okay, that it's not quite as stable. So you have to really figure out, this could be done on a wobble board or on a slack line, which is very wobbly. You really have to figure out, okay, how am I gonna stabilize? Maybe you're using your eyes initially, maybe your head is fixed straight on. Maybe you challenge yourself by looking side to side. And maybe you even challenge yourself, you're gonna fall for sure, with your eyes closed and turning your head. And don't get up so high on something that it would be, dangerous to fall. So I'm pretty close to the floor. If I fall, it's no big deal. I just touch down. And again, it's more of I would call it more of like a failing. Try to make it more of a failing opportunity. So you're learning from the failure. It's not that you're just trying to hold a fixed position and that's it, right? You're learning from the different opportunities with eyes closed, okay, eyes open, head in different directions or fast movements in your head, so you actually shut off your vestibular system. You really have to use your feet. And then trying to, make your feet less, we get reliant on our really slick, sticky mats that do a great job of, and a level floor that do a great job of helping us. But sometimes it's useful to mess with your postures a little bit and make them a little more complex. So with my eyes closed, there's greater complexity. With the floor a little bit uneven, there's greater complexity. And with my head moving, there's even greater complexity. Okay, so the fifth thing I want to mention is, and the last one, is having a few different strategies, a few different ways that you can easily get up and down off the floor, okay, without using your hands. So I find, like I've been teaching yoga and movement for over 20 years. And usually when I talk to students about this, they kind of get the importance of it, but maybe they haven't really worked on some of those strategies. If you think about different ways in your yoga practice you get up and down off the ground, maybe they're pretty linear, like either through a sun salutation or like putting your hands on the ground. But without using your hands, maybe you haven't thought about different ways to get up and down off the ground. Now, I will say that many people don't feel motivation to work on these kinds of things until they lose them. So that's the kind of the sad irony of it, is that until you have trouble getting up and down off the ground, you might not see the importance of practicing it on a regular basis. So I really feel that just having some foresight and knowing that this is something that is beneficial for everybody, having a few different strategies, a few different ways to get up and down off the ground easily without the use of your hands. Hands are a bonus. If you have your hands, great. But I think this is a beautiful way to practice some functionality and practicality into your yoga practice. You can up level it by adding some weight to your hands. That would make it more challenging. But start first, you can take some of the weight off. So for example, you might use your broomstick to help you initially to push into the floor, which I've just done to stand up from a seated position. The broomstick is a great tool for that because it will give you kind of a third limb that you can put weight in, okay? So when we're thinking about getting up and down off the ground, I like to think of it in terms of like three main ways that we might explore this, okay? And this is the last thing that we'll look at. So one way is through basically folding your joints. So if you think of like a collapsible table, like a poker table, you would just kind of fold those joints. And now I'm pretty close to the ground. I just need to either sit down or figure out how to pivot one side and then get down to the ground. Okay, so that's one way. Another way would be to think about, it's fall here in Canada, so think about the way a leaf would fall to the floor. Okay, sort of like in this horizontal floating pattern down. So what that could look like is sort of a wider stance. I go low on one side, then I go low on the other side, then I go low back to the first side, and then I'm on the ground. So that kind of like floating down sideways concept. And the third way would be to think about how I would use spirals to get down. So that could just be like a basic spiral like this, or maybe stepping around and spiraling around. And if you're gonna try these for the first time, have a broomstick handy so that you can, use the broomstick as you need. And then with time, maybe the broomstick just acts as a kind of balancing ballast that gives you, maybe just it's there if you need it. Okay, so that one here, by the way, the cross leg get up, this one, really interesting one. So that was the famous get up and down that came from that Brazilian researcher who showed a correlation between getting up and down without the use of your hands and how long we're going to live. So it really has there's some science that backs that. There's a famous meditation teacher by the name of Thich Nhat Hanh, and he famously, at the end of sitting and teaching and meditating on a platform, at the end of a 2-hour or sometimes 3-hour session, will be sitting in a cross leg or a lotus position and then literally just pop up, and the guy's in his 80s. So something to aspire to, just to be able to easily get ourselves up and down off the ground without the use of our hands. So one thing I did miss is with the first one, is with the grip strength, is you can stack, like I talked about, the overhead hang with different ways of gripping. And one of the things that I might add in for that would be, like, I have these 2 tea towels, make sure it's strong cloth, where I just play, this becomes much harder, but I play with different ways of gripping, and what you'll find with your overhead strength, even holding on to like a really good bar, like something that has grip and treads, and it's like, easy to hold on to. Most people report that what fails first is not their shoulder strength, but actually their hand skin and their grip strength. Okay, so the hand skin tends to get changes. It actually gets more and more resilient as we incorporate hanging movements, whether it's with towels or tree branches that have different types of bark, or smooth or rough surfaces, that I recommend that you play with some variability and that you add these sorts of things into your routine. So hopefully this has been helpful. I teach a longer course that is about integrating functional movements more into your yoga practices. It's functional movement for yogis, and whether or not it's something that you have like a keen interest in or not, I hope that you can see the value of incorporating some of these sort of natural functional human movements into a yoga practice, which has, again, a different context. So it's important for us to remember the context and to make sure that our yoga practice is aligned with whatever our values are. For me, like I mentioned earlier, a big value was the value of health and my family, like being there for my family, being able to play with my kids. And I found that what I was practicing in my modern postural practice exclusively was kind of limiting my ability to do all of those things. So ultimately, I believe that our practice should serve our lives and not the other way around. That's something that took me a long time to learn, but I think it's a good sort of rule of thumb, is to think about what you're practicing if you have a regular practice, and ask yourself, is that making my life better? Is it aligning me more with my values and the things that are important to me? So with that, I'll say that I wish you all well wherever you are in the world today. I hope you can incorporate some of these things, and I hope it's helpful. And we'll see you guys real soon.